Hello everyone, good afternoon. Make sure that I've got audio here. Booth? Do we have audio is the question. While we're waiting, and hopefully you can hear me, this is one of my favorite hats. It's from Gold Country Run and Sport, and it doesn't look nearly as cool in the video as it does in real life, so you should go and check out their hats. All right. Looks like I got audio. Unfortunately for you, you've got to listen to my voice now, but I guess you do have the choice of leaving if you want to. Anyway, my name's Rob, and I appreciate everybody joining me this afternoon. If you're here live, if you're watching as a recording, wonderful. Thanks for taking the time. We're going to talk about e-commerce fraud and how to wreak it upon as many different e-commerce platforms as you possibly can. Just kidding. We're going to talk about how to keep it from happening. It's a pretty big deal for a variety of reasons that will become a little bit clearer as we go. And I think you might be surprised at how it's done now versus what you might think in your head. I can tell you that when we started our sort of fraud handling arena, it ended up being a little different than I expected it to be too. So, anywho, let us get started. So, according to Signified, which did a survey of retailers, for every $100 in fraudulent e-commerce orders, it costs retailers $207. Now, let me go on the record by saying the sentence that I wrote on this slide kind of is really terribly grammatically oriented, and I can barely even speak it, but everybody gets what I mean. $207 is the cost for every $100 of e-commerce fraud that you're processing, and that sucks. And so my hope is today, at the request of Dan, which by the way, Dan, super good idea. This is definitely a huge subject. We can uncover sort of how e-commerce fraud tends to work, and then what you can do to avoid it. I feel like when I understand how something works, navigating it becomes much easier. So hopefully you feel the same way. So in order for any of this to make any contextual sense, and no, I promise I'm not getting into a sales pitch, I am going to quickly step through how the Run Free platform processes transactions so that you can get an idea of the, I guess, chain of accountability that takes place through the process. Obviously, Run Free is unique in that we are tightly tied to the point of sale system. So if you use a different solution for e-commerce, it isn't going to include the point of sale checks, but the process will generally be the same. So the Run Free platform is home to your website, e-commerce store, and or your mobile app, or some combination thereof. Everything's hosted and administered there, and it sits on your domain. So let's say runningstore.com. With me so far? A customer comes along and they start browsing your e-commerce store either on the web or in your app. It doesn't matter. It works the same in both places. Step one, when that customer decides to make a buying decision, is filling up their cart with stuff they want to buy. This is also when your point of sale system comes into the picture. Now, we integrate with Rick's, Lightspeed, and Heartland Retail, and this process works the same with all of them. Oh, good, I can't talk again this week. Happy day. That big S that you see in the box up there is your payment gateway. So this is the company whose sole responsibility is to process credit cards on your behalf. In most cases, that's Stripe. So hopefully you're with me so far. Now, when that customer clicks checkout on that page, step 2 happens. Run Free reaches out to the point of sale system and says, hey, do you have this stuff in stock? And then the point of sale system ostensibly responds, yep, I do. And check, that box is checked. With stock verified in the point of sale system, step 3 happens. This is when Run Free requests that the payment gateway processes the payment. So they do their thing, run a bunch of fraud checks, and then let us know that in this particular instance, the payment is valid as far as they're concerned, and they actually do all the stuff to move the money from the cardholder's account to yours as the retailer. From here, they let us know, obviously, that it's a valid transaction and that they have started this process. And we initiate step 4, which is submitting the order to your point of sale system. That removes the inventory and accounts for the transaction that Stripe just approved in step 3. After that, we kick off step 5. That is to let you know that you've got an order through whichever means you have set up in your receiving new order notifications area. Step 6 happens at pretty much the same time, which is to let the customer know your store got the order and is working on it by sending an invoice. And I clicked my mouse one too many times, but when you fulfill the actual order, step 7 involves physically shipping the order to the customer. Step 8 happens in parallel. That's another email from your store that lets them know that their order's on the way, and it gives them tracking information as well. That is the entire order process from the moment the customer clicks checkout to the moment they get the product that they ordered. Notice first that there are a lot of dependencies here. Step 4 can't happen if step 3 fails. So if Stripe decides to decline the card for some reason in step 3, the whole process grinds to a halt and the customer is given a warning that their payment was declined. In other words, it's not possible for our system to process an order to the point that it reaches you in the Run Free platform if the payment is known by the payment gateway to be fraudulent, because they're going to decline that payment. And that's not just the case with Run Free. That's the case with any e-commerce platform, or I would assume most, right? And of course, that's a good thing. But it does beg the question, if that's how all this works, how does online fraud happen? Why is it something that's a problem, and why do Dan and I want to talk about it today? Well, it all begins with stolen PII, or personally identifiable information. That's names, addresses, emails, credit cards, social security numbers, that sort of thing. And in order to sort of see the whole picture, let's step through like the entire process of fraud. It'll be fun, I promise. So first of all, how do people get this stuff in the first place? The attainment methods tend to fall into 3 groups. You have hacks and breaches, theft and skimming, and phishing and social engineering. So in hacks and breaches, somebody breaks into company servers that hold credit card data like a bank or a big retailer, and they just steal it. So you see stuff like that all over the place. I think there was the reason that I've got Capital One just randomly sitting there is that there was a very notable data breach with Capital One in 2019 that included credit card data. With theft and skimming, which is kind of the next group, somebody either takes the physical card from the owner, so think like pickpocket or B&E, or more commonly, they skim the credit card number with a little device. So you can see somebody found one on an ATM down in the bottom right-hand corner there. With a skimmer, you just swipe the card through the little device. It records all the info from the magnetic stripe on a little SD card, basically. And skimmers are usually placed by scammers on ATMs or gas pumps, or they're carried around by people who work in high transaction environments, knowingly or unknowingly. So in each situation, the idea is they're positioned to collect as many card numbers as possible. With phishing, you get tricked into giving a scammer your credit card info because you think they're a legitimate business. I think we can all say that we have fallen victim to this process to some degree. Most of us have caught ourselves in the middle of almost doing something bad, but a lot of us have gone all the way through with it. It's hard to tell when you're being phished these days. Most of the time, this happens by getting a link in an email from somebody that's pretending to be, let's say, the power company about to shut off your electricity. And in a panic, you log in to their fake website that looks very real, which they've linked from their email to you, pretending to be the power company, and gladly hand over your credit card info so that they don't cut off your power, which really isn't a problem in the first place because you just put your credit card info into the scammer's hands, and now they have all your payment data. That sucks. Pretty common. And finally, with social engineering, a scammer pretends to be you, usually by referencing stolen information about you and then contacting a legitimate party to try and convince that party to give them access to information like bank accounts or cell phone accounts and so on. Social engineering is a little bit less common when it comes to this kind of fraud, simply because it sort of takes a little bit more of a specific pointed approach. Most of the fraud that we run into as retailers or as an e-commerce platform is the stuff where you've got a whole bunch of credit cards and it's kind of a numbers game more than a specifically targeted thing. So in all cases, or just about all cases, regardless of how the data is actually obtained, it's typically packaged as a big bundle of credit card numbers and sold on the black market to the people who try to actually commit the fraud on your e-commerce sites. Most of the time, these fraudsters that you have to contact or that you have contact with aren't the ones who stole the cards in the first place. They're the ones who bought them in a batch, like you might with pine straw or bananas. Either way, it is against the law to do that, so don't be doing that if you're getting any ideas. So now we know they get payment data. We know how they get that payment data. Let's go through how the fraud's actually committed, and this is the interesting stuff. Couple of techniques. The first technique, and by far the most common, this is almost exclusively what we see, is called card testing fraud. So the scammer, which looks like a Ninja Turtle in a hoodie with a baseball cap on in this picture, buys a batch of those stolen credit cards on the black market. So bunch of different stolen cards. They pay, whatever, some amount of Monero for it. And then Leonardo here goes to your e-commerce store and tries to use a stolen card to buy something. Most of the time, it's something that's inexpensive. So the idea here is they want to test that the card's still valid, but they don't want to use it for a huge transaction that'd show up on the radar of the actual card owner, who probably doesn't realize that their card's been stolen yet. You with me? So low transaction amount for something silly. Excuse me. And then, if that card is accepted, great. They just bought a pack of goo from you from across the country. If it's not, then they just move on to the next, and they just repeat that process with every single one of the cards that they purchased. The result of this is a list of cards that are still valid, which the scammer then will take and use to buy big stuff elsewhere. High denomination Amazon gift cards, for example, are a really popular thing among scammers to pick up. Like I said, this is the most common fraud that we see at Run Free. And most of the time, the testing process itself is scripted, meaning that somebody's testing these cards with a program rather than by hand. So it happens fast and in super massive numbers. If you see, as a retailer, if you see a weird order for a goo packet, I'm using goo packet as an example, but this is a pair of socks. I guess somebody buying socks online isn't that big of a deal. That actually happens in real life. But one goo packet across the country is probably not going to be something that you would see. Then you look in Stripe and you see a bunch of declined payments surrounding that one approved payment. Guaranteed you're looking at a case of card testing fraud. And like I said, this is the most common that we come across. Let's say it this way. This is the most common that we identify. The next type we see is called refund fraud. Now, the idea here is that our hacker uses a stolen card to make a seemingly legitimate purchase. Let's say like a brand new pair of Clifton 9s or something like that. Then they try to return the item, but when they do, they make up a reason the refund needs to be on a different card. Either they lost the old one, it's expired, they tell you it was stolen, haha, joke's on you. whatever their reason is, right? So when you refund the purchase, their original purchase, which was done with a stolen card, to the new legitimate card, they now have essentially laundered that stolen money into a legitimate account that they can use for crayons and gasoline, right? Interesting stuff. The next type of fraud, account takeover fraud, is the one that most people picture when they think of online fraud. But we actually don't really see a lot of this on the Run Free platform. And I'll talk a little bit about why. This is going to depend a lot on how platforms work. But generally speaking, this isn't something that we see much of. So the way this works is pretty simple. The scammer gets your login credentials to a website the same way they might buy your credit card information, or through phishing, any of the vectors that we talked about earlier in the video. And they make a purchase as you using that account. So we don't see this, mainly because we don't store credit card data on Run Free at all. The way we look at it is, in modern times where Apple Pay and Google Pay exist, there's no need to put your customers at added risk by storing payment information on our platform. So if somebody does end up being the victim of an account takeover fraud, the scammer won't have access to anything that they can use to pay for the stuff that they want to fraudulently purchase. This isn't the case with all e-commerce platforms. This isn't the case with all websites or circumstances. So I'm not saying that it can't happen. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of insight into what we see and what we don't. So the next technique is called interception fraud. And it's pretty self-explanatory. So in this situation, the hacker uses a stolen card to make a purchase online, and uses the legitimate shipping address of the person whose stolen card the scammer is trying to use. And at some stage after the payment is processed, the scammer requests a change to the shipping address so that they can redirect that package to themselves or to an accomplice instead of to the rightful owner of the card that they stole. The reason they go through all this trouble is that in a lot of cases, banks won't auto flag cards for fraud if they're used online in unusual circumstances, as long as the shipping address is the same as the billing address / the address that's associated with that card. If not, meaning if somebody used a different shipping address or a different billing address, something along those lines, some banks will lock the card right there. So the idea here is to avoid having the card locked by using the shipping address that is connected to the billing address of the original stolen card. Now, obviously, I just hit a button on my computer. Let's hope that I didn't break anything. Now, obviously, the shipping address that they attempt to change it to in the end is really where the magic happens here. This last one that I want to talk about is called triangulation fraud, and it is a doozy. So in this scheme, Raphael here creates a fake e-commerce store. Okay, so the scammer's running their own fake e-commerce store listing products that you might list for sale. A real, well-meaning customer stumbles on their fake e-com store and believes that it is legit. So they place an order with that fake store using their actual legitimate credit card. Okay. From there, the scammer uses a totally different stolen card to place an order with your running store for the item that the original buyer thought they were purchasing from the fake store that our scammer set up. Hopefully you're with me so far. You fulfill the order and the customer gets the product from you that they thought they ordered from the scammer. So they might be a little confused that it's coming from Intergalactic Running Company instead of Jim's shop of shoes that they thought they were ordering from. But they got their stuff, so they're happy, right? The problem is our man down here in the bottom left of this little slide had his credit card information stolen by the scammer the moment that he placed the order on the fake site. And in a couple of days, you're going to get hit with a chargeback when the owner of the stolen card, which was used to order from you, realizes what happened. The scammer walks away with the original buyer's credit card info, and the original buyer has no clue what happened because, remember, as far as they're concerned, they just ordered a pair of shoes online and got them. So no fraud, right? Pretty brutal, right? Yeah. So with all of that said, now that we know kind of like how Run Free processes transactions, now we know how people get stolen credit card information, and we know the techniques they use to commit fraud. What are we at the Run Free Project doing to prevent this? It's a very good question. So first, in our platform's admin section under customers, you have the option to go in and block accounts. This means the person using that account won't be able to log back in and use it again. It will be, their name will be in red. Sorry, Jacob, had to use you as an example. But there's nothing keeping them from just going and creating a new account. So we kind of considered this to be more of a warning / deterrent step than anything else. So as far as like legit security steps go, this is kind of weak, but it's worth mentioning because you do have this option in case you want to use it for something else. I wouldn't lean entirely on blocking accounts in that way as a security measure. There's also an area under platform settings called Manage Fraud and Blocking Rules. This is legit stuff. On this screen, on this screen, if you click Add Rule, it'll pop this little modal where you can set blocking rules based on specific characteristics, things like addresses or phone numbers, IP addresses, pretty much everything in between. The idea here is that if someone's persistently trying to commit fraud using your e-commerce site, they're probably using some static piece of information like the same shipping address or the same IP address, which is their computer's address, across all of their attempts, even if they try to use the same account. This section of the platform lets you stop those and any other orders that contain whatever you set in these fields. So a common situation where this would be helpful, would be if I have somebody that's clearly committing card testing fraud, and I see all their denied attempts and then a couple of good ones. I know this is what they're doing as the store owner. If I go in and block their account as a first step, which is the wrong thing to do, but we'll talk about that in a minute. If I go in and block their account as a first step, then they'll just go create another account and they'll keep going. There's almost always some piece of shared information that this person or program or whatever it is that's attempting the fraud uses. So if they've created 5 different accounts, they may have the same shipping address depending on the style of fraud. They may have the same IP address, that kind of thing. And this is where you would stop that from happening by creating a rule in this little section. Now, there are other measures that we take on our end that I'll just acknowledge here. Obviously, don't want to give away all the secrets, but we keep a very close eye on this stuff, and we do work with stores to stem any risk that you guys might face. And some of you probably have had outreach from us saying, hey, Timmy over here seems like they might be a fraudster. You might want to take a look at this. We had a report from another one of our stores that this same account did some shady business. So heads up. But regardless, we are actively working to ensure that we're minimizing fraud in the best way that we possibly can. And this kind of leads us to the next logical question. And that is, what should you do if you suspect fraud? So, little 3-step process here for you. The first thing that you should do is go to your payment gateway, which is Stripe in most cases, and flag the payment there. So with Stripe, you log into their admin console, you find the payment that you suspect of being fraudulent. Remember, if you've gotten the order already, then Stripe or your payment provider, payment gateway, pardon me, whoever it is, has already approved this. They believe that it's a legitimate transaction. So you go in, you click on the payment that you suspect of being fraudulent. You click the 3 dots over there on the right-hand side and select Add to Block List. So that's going to flag it as potentially fraudulent and blocked, and they won't be able to use that card again. You can also see that Stripe has a little risk evaluation along with some other pertinent info here as well. So sometimes if somebody calls or emails you and says, hey, your stupid e-commerce site by those idiots keeps blocking my credit card transaction, and then you go in and you look at the payment attempt and it's like, radioactive fraud detected, then you know exactly what's going on. And I want to be sure to make a really important point here before we move on. In the end, your payment gateway ultimately owns accountability for fraudulent transactions. That's what you pay them for. So that transaction fee that you pay to your credit card provider, part of that is to make sure that you're giving them the money to fund anti-fraud tools so you don't have to deal with fraud. Their system is always the point in time where a payment is approved or declined, and if their system passes a fraudulent attempt, you get taken for a ride. If they don't, most of the time you don't even notice it. So if you suspect fraud, go to the payment gateway and take action first, because they're the only entity that can actually do something material about continued fraudulent activity, besides the couple of things on the platform side that I highlighted a few minutes ago that are really just mitigation techniques and not really taking care of the issue per se. It's got to be done with your payment gateway. So, flagging it as fraud with your payment gateway. Numero dos, on the run free side of the house, block the shipping address using the fraud. Block the shipping address in the fraud and blocking rules area that I just showed you a minute ago. That way, if this person is doing a card testing fraud and you've blocked that one payment, they don't come back in with 20 other credit cards, and one that happens to be good comes through again. So step 2, block their address. Shipping address is probably the best one, but obviously use your judgment. Step 2 also contains the optional block the user step. So everybody feels differently about this, and of course, it's up to you what you want to do, but I don't know that I would want to flag to a potential fraudster that I know that they're trying to scam me. I would almost leave the user active and block the shipping address, and as long as, of course, that works. If it doesn't work, then this is a moot conversation. But by blocking the user, they'll know that they aren't allowed to log in using that account anymore, and they might just go create a new account. Now, luckily, by blocking the shipping address in the fraud and blocking settings section that we talked about earlier, even with a new account, it'll still be blocked. But maybe they'll waste a little more time on their old account if you don't block them. Up to you. Step number 3. And this is really important. Let us know what's going on. If we know, we can potentially take action across the whole platform to reduce a user or a group of users' ability to interact with the system. So like we can find IP addresses that are associated with certain users and block them. We can do other things at the platform level that you might not be able to do. Again, the payment provider is really where the action takes place, but when we're trying to kind of like contain the activity of this bad actor, working with us is a good way to rock and roll. We can also flag what you've reported to us to other stores that see the same sources. So we can run a query against all of our stores and say, does this account exist? Oh, it does. All right, we'll proactively reach out to each of those stores and say, hey, listen, Tommy saw that this person at this shipping address was doing something weird. You might want to keep an eye out. So giving us a heads up that this is going on is mega helpful. It also, of course, helps us improve the tools that we provide you by giving us feedback. So how do you prevent fraud? So we know like the actions to take, the 3 actions, right? Block it at the payment provider, go on to Run Free and block the shipping address and maybe their user account, and then let us know. How can you prevent this? And now, of course, there is no perfect answer, but here is the gist of best practices that we've gotten from our member stores. First, look for weird orders. So if you see an online order for a goo packet, it's probably card testing fraud. If you normally get in-state orders, but this one comes from across the country, maybe it's worth looking into. By looking into, what I mean is calling the customer. So legitimately dial up the phone number on the order and try to determine if this is legit or not. You'll know immediately, trust me. If it feels shady, just cancel the order. Simple as that. If it doesn't, rock and roll. If you suspect it's fraud, take swift action. Follow the 3 steps that I just went through as soon as you discover it. You will be helping some poor person whose money is currently being drained. You'll reduce the potential for this fraudster to fraud-tize other stores, whether those are run specialty retailers or other stores that they might be trying to fraudulentize. And remember, be sure to let us know. Shoot us a note in the platform chat. Everybody's got it in their admin section. It's the fastest way to get word to our group. And we can help get the word out and take system-wide steps to try to prevent repeats. And my apologies if you can hear the extremely loud noises. They are now mowing my yard right outside my door because they know I'm doing a YouTube live stream, and that's how the universe works, right? A couple of things to consider before we give you your day back. When it comes to e-commerce and fraud, there is a balance that we as an e-commerce provider have to strike between ease of use for your customers, because we don't want to end up making it so hard to buy from you that they go somewhere else, and security to ensure that you're protected. So we take some very specific steps to try and keep that balance. And we can add additional steps if you find yourself being a repeated victim of fraudulent attempts. So, like I said, always reach out to us, but understand that we are always balancing this usability versus security concept, as is any other software provider that's going to do any kind of payment processing whatsoever. It's not just us. We're cool, but we're not the only ones that are cool in this way. The same goes for you as a running store. Sometimes potential fraud feels like a gray area. So, if the payment gateway approved the payment, they don't consider it fraud. So where's the line? And honestly, it's hard for me to give you a lot of guidance here, so you'll have to think on this one. Obviously, if the payment is declined because of fraud, which almost all of them are, honestly, very few actual fraudulent purchases end up happening. I'm just trying to give you the 411 on how they do if they do. But anyway, if they're declined because of fraud, then you have nothing to consider and it's no big deal. It's those times that you'd get an order for, say, like 10 pair of Cloud Monsters and the payment was approved, but like the shipping address is way different than the billing address and things seem a little bit weird. That's where you have to apply this sort of gray area as you're thinking to yourself. Obviously, take the steps, right? Give them a call, see what their story is. But again, sometimes it really is just your call. And finally, of course, I couldn't do a video about payments and security if I didn't suggest one of my favorite topics. If we all just moved to Bitcoin, none of this would be a problem anyway. So take the orange pill, get yourself some Bitcoin, and opt out of this crazy system. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this was useful. A couple of comments before we drop. When it comes to fraud on our platform, and I really don't know what other platform providers in our space are seeing, we process a boatload of transactions every single day. 24/7, 365, we're ripping through transactions left and right. We really don't see a lot of fraud. That which we have seen tends to be targeted to a specific store in really high volumes, which, we work with the store to try and mitigate as far as the traffic is concerned. But of course, ultimately it's on the payment provider, as I mentioned before. But this is something that you should be keeping an eye out for. And it's something that's going to happen on any place that processes payments, especially a place that processes payments where the payer can be pseudonymous to some degree. So, it's not like it's just a run free thing or other e-commerce thing. It's the nature of the business, but it really does not happen very often at all. And I promise Stripe doesn't pay me to say this. We've always had great success with fraud handling from Stripe. Our customers have as well. You have a lot of control. There are additional products that you can purchase from Stripe to sort of plug into your Stripe account if you really want to go totally bananas. We haven't found a situation where that's necessary as long as the store is flagging the orders as fraudulent with Stripe and they're telling us what's going on, and we're taking some actions on the side to keep the bad actors from even being able to access the store in the first place. They're good to go. So with that said, keep an eye out for yourselves and for one another. Thank you again for joining me for this afternoon's live stream. I always try to make these short, and they never are. But if you've ever spent any time on the phone with me before, this is no surprise to you. I might as well just give up on the whole trying to be brief thing and just, own it. Anyway, appreciate you guys. Please subscribe, like the video, comment or chat your suggestions for topics that we could cover. This is your show. We're trying as hard as we can to give you the knowledge and tools to best navigate the online commerce universe so that you can be successful in the space, and then we'll be successful if you're successful. So that's the plan here. Anyway, let us know if you have any questions. You can email us at hello@runfreeproject.com. Visit the website, drop us a chat in your Runfree platform admin or at the site. Or, if you live up the road from me, just yell out your back door loud enough and I'll probably hear you. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you again next week.